so many things about the bar, and you lose those things, and I always try to attend the memorial services for lawyers, and I sort of bought my tombstone earlier this year, so I sort of feel like consistent with that, But it's hard to believe. I think back, it was 47 years ago when I came to Jamestown, and 47 years, I mean, that seems like a long time.
Well, talk about that. You're from Corry.
Right, yeah.
Were you destined to be a lawyer?
No, it's interesting. My father died when I was a young boy, and I had a football coach who had a son my age, and my football coach sort of, I guess, adopted me as a son, you might say.
Coach Hanna.
Lou Hanna. And Lou Hanna had a brother who was a successful CPA in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And in addition to Lou's son, Mike Hanna, who just retired about 2 years ago after having been the athletic director at Hobart for, I don't know, maybe the last 40 years or thereabouts. There was another friend of ours whose parents had divorced when he was very young, and so Lou sort of took both me and my other friend whose parents had been divorced when he was young under his wing, and he encouraged us to become accountants. So I always did what my football coach told me to do, of course. And so I went to the University of Rochester, and I didn't really know too much about accounting, and I majored in accounting. And I graduated in 1967. And of course that was the height of the Vietnam War, and I was planning to go in the Air Force. And it was very interesting. I'd had my physical in the spring, and I had been dating my longtime girlfriend. Her name was Connie Root. It was now Connie Flowers, and we got married the weekend after I graduated. And I was going to go to Laughlin Air Force Base and go through officer candidate school, and then go in the Air Force. And Connie had one more year to attend college. And during the time I was in officer candidate school, she wouldn't have been permitted to be with me anyway. So anyways, lo and behold, a couple months after we were married, I found out that she was pregnant. And one of the good things about growing up in Corry was that there were a lot of kids who unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to go to college. So there were many people to fill the draft. So I immediately went from being A1 to A3. And so I went to work for Ernst & Ernst. I had planned to do that originally in the summer, and then in the fall I was going to go to officer candidate school and then come back to Ernst & Ernst after that. But I started out early, and I was with Ernst & Ernst in Syracuse for 3 years. Ernst & Ernst, of course, now Ernst & Young. And after doing that for about 2 years, I was kind of dreading the thought of getting up in the morning and going to work. And I thought, well, you can't dread going to work when you're 25 years of age. So I applied to Albany Law School. And I think I had $2,000 to my name, and Connie had graduated from college by that time, and was gone through her student teaching, and so she was a licensed New York State teacher. And we went to Albany with our son, who was about 2.5 years of age at the time. And I went to Albany Law School, and in summer of 1973, I after graduating from law school and taking the bar exam, well, in the fall I'd written to some law firms around Jamestown, and one of them was Price and Miller. And I came down at Thanksgiving of 1972 and met them for the first time, and we had a very harmonious relationship right off the bat, and so I started I think it was August 6th of 1973. Came down, I had 1 week after graduating from law school to find some place for us to live. So I came down 1 week to buy a house with Connie still in Albany. She didn't see the house I'd bought for us until about Memorial Day weekend, I think it was. And I started with them. At that time, Walter Miller, who had graduated from Albany Law School in 1927, was in the firm, and Walter was pretty much winding down. He was approximately 70 years of age at the time, and Charlie Price, Sam Price, and Bill Evans. And Bill left us about 1986. I always said he started. He got involved in Pizza Hut franchises around southern New York. I always said he started making instead of practicing law, making dough, and that was literally and figuratively true. And so we changed the law firm's name to Price Flowers, or Price Miller and Flowers, and in 1976, Wilson C. Price III, Charlie's son, who was known as Trip Price, joined us. And then 3 years later, Sam Price, Jr., joined us. Of course, he's the brother Sam's son. And I practiced law with them through, I retired as of December 31st of 2016 after 43 years. And, you know, it was thinking back on it, I was I've always said to people that the best decision I ever made in my life was marrying my wife. Second best decision I ever made in my life was getting employed by Price and Miller. And I had a very harmonious relationship with them, and it was good. But it's interesting. I was thinking a little bit about how things have changed, you know, since I started back in 1973. And I think you started, shortly thereafter. And it seems that after we graduated from law school, I've always said I think there's nothing more dangerous than a young lawyer right out of law school. You have all these weapons, and you really don't have the judgment sometimes to know when you should exercise them. And it was. I think, well, it was not too many years before 1973, I think, when lawyers you had a clerk for a while before you could be admitted. And I can see a lot of sense in that. You know, I learned so much from the Prices and Walter Miller and Bill Evans, and you know, it was great. It seemed like almost all the lawyers would come back and come to a firm the same way, you know, you came back with Cadwell and Sharp. And it was, you know, I was thinking about some of those lawyers that we used to have. I mean, they were such characters. I mean, people like Tubby Scarpino, Ernie Leet. They really were. They were unique. And in fact, when I came in August of 1973, Bar Association meetings were being held at noon. But I don't think it was too many years before that they used to meet, I think, in the Hotel Jamestown building. And I think they were always night meetings, and they'd have dinner. And I'm sure they had some drinks and some more drinks. And so they're almost like a night out. And it's thinking back, you know, to the way things are now, it seemed that most people went to the Bar Association meetings in those days. And you know, I think one of the most wonderful not traits, but experiences that the Bar Association provides is, when a lawyer passes away, to have a memorial service. I think that's very unique. I've heard a number of lawyers say, we don't have anything like that. And it's a shame that as I go to those things, you see fewer and fewer of the younger lawyers. And I think there's a lot of history and tradition that is being lost by that absence. But here I'm sort of rambling on.
What's interesting, talk a little bit about Walter Miller. What was he like?
Walter was an amazing man. Walter's father had been a mailman, and Walter grew up on Park Street, which is on the south side of town off Forest Avenue. And when Walter went to law school, you didn't have to go to undergraduate school. So Walter went directly from Jamestown High School. So he must have graduated from Jamestown High School in 1924. Went to Albany Law School, graduated from Albany Law School in 27, and then he came back and started working with Wilson Price. And the two of them, practiced through the Depression, and Walter used to tell that, our office, it was in the Fenton building for many, many years. And Walter said that when I came, we had the whole 5th floor of the Fenton building, which is not a real large building, but it was, Walter explained that during the Depression, things were so tight financially that they had to give up all their space with the exception of like one room. And I think that probably Mr. Price and Walter and a secretary or maybe 2 secretaries sort of consolidated in that fashion. But Walter married Martha Tinkham. Now, there was a store down in Brooklyn Square, which was torn down by the time I got to town in '73, and it was called, I think, Tinkham Brothers Grocery Store. Or, I'm not sure if you're familiar. I don't know if that was around when you were around, but Martha Tinkham's father was quite, financially successful, and Walter married Martha. They never had any children. Walter would have been a great father, and I think Walter sort of looked at me and Bill Evans, who was, like I said, Bill's, I guess 4 years older than 5 years older than I am, and I think that Walter sort of looked at Bill and me almost as sons, and he was very nice to us, and he was a true gentleman, and he was always impeccably dressed. And Walter, 1973, he'd been in practice, I guess, at that point about 46 years, and he was slowing down, but he continued to come to the office every single day. Sometimes, if you have a question or a problem, go in and sit down, and Walter would love to talk it through with you. And Walter passed away in 1993, and he was 89 years of age at the time. And I think Walter came to the office up until like 2 or 3 months before he passed away. But he was just really a very, very nice man, and he just looked the part of when you picture a lawyer, Walter had flowing white hair, and he was always impeccably dressed, and he was a great guy.
Definitely, when I came, he was the senior guy of the bar, and you saw him occasionally at Lissandro's.
Right.
He'd have that lunch there. So, and then there was Charlie, who was the oldest of the two Prices.
Right. Yeah, Charlie was born literally on Armistice Day, November the 11th of 1918.
Really?
So you can just imagine how happy the Prices must have been that day. Yeah. Charlie was the second child there. They had a daughter, Barbara Chadwick, later Barbara Chadwick after she was married, was the older child. And then Sam was born in 1921. Charlie had completed, he'd gone to Williams College. He graduated from Williams, and he'd gone to Cornell Law School. And he completed his first year of law school when he was either volunteered or drafted for World War II. And so when he got done, he went back to Cornell, and I think he had about 2 more years. So he joined Walter and his dad in 1947. Well, Sam had graduated or was born in 1921, and Sam had gone to Amherst College. And when he was, I think he was a senior in 1942, and he knew that he was going to be going into the military. And Sam took cryptography courses when he was still at Amherst as a student, realizing that there'd be a need for that. He said one thing he didn't really think through was that the number of intelligent people probably going into cryptography, and he said that he found himself in a special training school after boot camp, and there were professors and very, very intelligent, educated people. And Sam said that obviously everybody in the unit couldn't be an officer, and so Sam said he was probably the youngest sergeant major in the army, when he was, 22, 23 years of age, which was very unusual. But Sam went to Yale Law School after he got done with World War II, and so he joined the firm in 1948. But it was Bill Evans had been he graduated from West Point, and then Bill had been in Vietnam, actually before a lot of the fighting really got started, and he graduated from the University of Florida Law School, and he'd graduated, I think, in 1969, I think. And it was interesting. He practiced law for 2 years down in Fort Lauderdale. But even at that point, Bill said that you could see the drugs coming into South Florida, and he didn't want to raise his family down there. And he'd married Carol Davis, who was from Jamestown. Her dad, Petey Davis, owned Jamestown Electroplating Company. And so Bill had come to the firm in 71. Bill had practiced law, I think, for about 2 years down in Florida. But they were, it was really you couldn't have asked for a greater place to get started. I mean, the Walter, the Prices, Bill were all such, class people. They were very intelligent, and as a young lawyer starting out, I spent a lot of time in their offices sort of talking things through with them. They'd give me an assignment or something, and they were always very kind. And Sam in particular, Sam had a great ability. He'd give me a question, and our law firm had represented Chautauqua Institution for many years, and there are these interesting questions about Chautauqua Institution, since it's not quite a village, but it has a lot of the attributes of a village and the powers of a Chautauqua policeman, and so Sam would give me some of these issues to think about and research, and I'd think I'd come to a conclusion, and I'd sit down with Sam, and without saying, you dummy, you're totally 180 degrees wrong on what your conclusion is, he would just throw questions of sort of like Socratic method, sort of make you realize, start out thinking one thing, I'd find out it was 180 degrees wrong. But it was, like like I said, they were great guys to get started with.
Talk about Chautauqua institutions. Certainly, Price, Miller, and Flowers have been known to represent, and maybe still do, Sam does, from really back to Wilson Price days. Did Sam ever talk about how that ultimately got started?
Well, I don't know. I do know that Wilson Price was really quite a guy. Wilson's father and uncle were contractors. And they, as I recall hearing from them, they built the Sheldon House on Lakeview Avenue. And sometime in the 1890s, Leland Stanford started Stanford University. And as Charlie Price used to say, he had all these buildings and these professors, but he didn't have any students. So if you could just get yourself there, you could attend Stanford for nothing. And somehow Wilson Price, who obviously had been a very impressive guy, when he was in high school, ended up going to Stanford University. He graduated at Stanford University, I think in 1897, and then he went on to Harvard Law School, graduated from Harvard Law School in 1900. And as I mentioned, I think a lot of lawyers in those days didn't go to undergraduate school. They just went to law school. And the fact that, you go to Stanford and then you go to Harvard Law School, he was a pretty sharp guy. So I think someplace, let's see. It probably would have been some place around like 1915. Wilson Price became the attorney for Chautauqua Institution. The reason why I know is roughly then is because after Wilson Price, who practiced law until I think Wilson Price was 92 or so when he died, and when Sam came to the office, Sam Sr., in 48, I think Sam took over as attorney for his dad for Chautauqua Institution, and sometime in maybe 1950, 1952. And when Sam Price Jr. joined the firm in 1981, and after his dad retired in 1986, Sam Jr. became the attorney, took over as general counsel for Chautauqua Institution. About 6 years ago or so, Chautauqua Institution gave Sam a nice resolution recognizing the fact that first his grandfather, then his father, and then Sam had represented the institution for 100 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting, when I was in Albany Law School, I took a course that was called State and Local Government, and one of the questions dealt with Section 421, I think, of the Real Property Tax Law. And in about 1970, the assessor of the town of Chautauqua had tried to assess Chautauqua Institution property, put it on the fully taxable roll. And Charlie and Ernie Leet, who was another, interesting lawyer, a very brilliant, another graduate of Harvard Law School, took the case all the way to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals, held that some buildings, for example, like the Colonnade Building, the amphitheater, buildings that clearly are part of the educational, makeup of Chautauqua Institution were totally exempt from real property taxes. Other buildings, the golf course, the bookstore, where they were partially taxable. But it was interesting when I took this course. I think it was about fall of my senior year, and so it was very interesting. I knew at that time I was going to be joining Price and Miller, and to read this case in my in my law school class about, Price and Miller being the attorneys for Chautauqua Institution and prevailing. And I thought, wow, these guys are really big news here. But anyway, it was interesting. But
When you came back, Tom, did you have any interest in getting involved with some of the other young lawyers, some did, in getting the assistant public defender, assistant district attorney, things like that? Was that of any interest to you?
Well, basically, when I came back in 1973, Bill Evans had been the associate corporation counsel, the city of Jamestown. And around that time, Bob Alessi had been the corporation counsel, and I don't know if Bob decided he wanted to retire or didn't want to continue on doing it, but Mark Hampton became the corporation counsel, and Rick Soter, who graduated also in June of 1973 from law school, took over as the associate corporation counsel. And I don't recall exactly how long it was, maybe a year or two, that Mark Hampton continued on as a corporation counsel, but then he retired or moved full-time to Wright in Hampton. And Rick Soter became the corporation counsel, and so they needed an associate corporation counsel. And since Bill had been associate corporation counsel, I sort of thought, well, it'd be a way for me to, in a sense, you might say, get a client for the firm. So I would spend my mornings over in City Hall and my afternoons and evenings in the law firm working on matters. But I'd had a little bit of experience in my law school course on state and local governments that helped. But that was an interesting. In those days, the Democrats were very much in control of the city. Stan Lundeen was the mayor, and the city council was, I don't know if there were any Republicans at all in the city council. But Mark Hampton had sort of, I think, thought that it'd be good if the corporation's counsel's office was really, instead of being really a political office, that if they had, maybe a Republican in one of the, as a corporation counsel or or associate corporation counsel, and a Democrat as a corporation counsel. Rick Soter was a corporation counsel, and needless to say, Rick was a very ardent Democrat, and so I was a token Republican. But I did that for, I became a partner in Price and Miller January 1st of 1977. So I did that, like maybe a year and a half, something like that.
Were you part of the eminent domain aspect of it when Stan Lundeen was not?
No, that predated me. In other words, things were torn down when we arrived in town in 1973. I think that had started like maybe 1970.
Yeah, forget that.
And I enjoy going to the Jamestown Riverwalk doctor's office or building and see those pictures of what Brooklyn Square looked like in those days. And it seemed like you almost pictured Little Italy or something in New York City, as far as looking at those pictures, you can just feel the grocery stores and the whole thing. Just really, it's a shame that those buildings were all. But I guess the buildings were shot, and it was good for Jamestown, although there's still a lot of empty space down there. Some big parking lots.
When you and I were early days, every once in a blue moon, whether it was from family court, Supreme Court, you'd be asked to be assigned counsel for matters which were litigation related. This is not surrogates court stuff where you got to be, guardian ad litem, and that was sort of not even worth talking about. But did you ever get caught up in a litigation matter or a criminal defense matter?
I'm about the last person that I would ever consider myself to be a trial attorney, but really a funny story is our Judge Adams, the county court judge, was. I think he was. Well, you certainly were practicing when Leetown Adams was around, and
Cindy was his clerk.
oh, okay. I'd forgotten that, and I knew she was a clerk for Judge Cass. Yeah, and but if you recall, the Democrats controlled the county legislature, and the Democrats were in charge of appointing the public defender, and they appointed Ed Fagan as a public defender. Right. And Adams, who was an ardent Republican, took he took the attitude that he didn't think that he was competent to serve as a public defender, and so for a period of time, he would assign it, like, outside counsel to represent somebody. And I mean, talk about appointing somebody that's totally incompetent. I mean, I had absolutely no experience whatsoever when it came to criminal law. The only criminal law I knew about was what I'd learned at Albany Law School in my first year, when criminal law was one of the required courses. And it was such an ironic situation to have me be appointed the public defender for this poor indigent guy who had been arrested for robbing a gas station up in Ripley. And I knew nothing about anything. So I think I went to Sam Sr. I said, what am I going to do? I'm totally incompetent. And he said, well, what you should do is call up Bill Arison. Mm-hmm. Bill Arison was certainly the most experienced criminal defense attorney in the county, and a very nice man. And so I went over to see Bill Arison and explained to him where I was, and he gave me these papers. It was called an omnibus motion. And it must have been 50 pages long. And so I went back and dutifully, copied this 50-page motion, made the motion to Adams to review the grand jury minutes, and Adams reviewed the grand jury minutes and decided that the charges were insufficient to charge my client. So my client was he was released from jail. So my one criminal case, that was the only assigned counsel case I ever had. I had many situations where there's a law guardian in family court or law guardian in circuit court matters, but I think the judges understood that. Well, our law firm really, we didn't do any kind of criminal law work. We didn't do, it was pretty much, I guess you would just say, white shoe type stuff that we worked on. But probably judges knew enough that, I'm not going to name them.
As you look at this composite, Tom, and everybody kind of, if you see somebody that you'd say, oh, here's a story I want to tell you about Howard Crossley, or you want to, whatever you want to, Tucci Scarpino, you had some real characters in your world up there.
We really did. Well, looking at the top, here's Honorable McKinley Phillips. I remember taking Walter Miller to the Bar Association Memorial Service for McKinley Phillips. And in those days, we used to hold them in different places, but this particular one I think was held in the Congregational Church. And I can't recall exactly what the year would have been. But as I was taking Walter I don't recall if I was taking him back to Bemis. Maybe it could be because Walter got to the point where he was not able to drive for a while, so he used to have somebody who would drive him down to the Austin and drive him home. But as we were leaving, Walter explained to me that he had saved McKinley Phillips' house more than once. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he told me about, there was a time, and I'm not sure exactly when it was, but I suspect it might have been in the 1930s, 1940s. And the lawyers, and I'm not sure if it had been after a bar association meeting, but they had been having a good time, and they got playing poker. And it got down to the point where McKinley Phillips put a deed to his house into this poker pot. And Walter was just observing the game, and he maybe had not been drinking quite as much as the others had been drinking. And he said, you know, I don't think you really want to do that. And so he talked him into taking his deed to his house out of the poker pot, and going back to playing a little more friendly game of poker. But can you imagine? I mean, putting the deed to your home. You imagine going home if you'd lost it. You know, explaining to your wife how you're going to have to move out of your house because you don't own your house anymore. You lost in a poker game. But it's interesting. A lot of there were a group of lawyers in the Wellman building, and they were sole practitioners. Ross Weeks, I think, was one of them. J. Howard Peterson, I think, was one of them.
Marcus Conley.
Mark Conley.
I think Sam Conti was there.
Okay, I'd forgotten that. But anyways, I think, and Sam Skinner.
Oh, gosh.
And I don't know if Sam might have been dead. I'm not sure if, I don't quickly see Sam Skinner here. But I think that they used to spend as much time playing bridge in the afternoon as they did practicing law. Sam Skinner was an interesting guy. He lived in Corey. In fact, he lived right across the street from one of my best friends. And Sam used to take the train over every morning from Corey to Jamestown. And then he'd catch the night train from Jamestown back to Corey. But they, you know, it was just such a different way of you know, you think of the way the things are now. I remember one time, I don't recall if it was Sam Price or Senior or Charlie Price, but they talked about the fact that when we were attorneys for the First National Bank, and in those days, all the local banks, if they had a foreclosure action, they'd have a local law firm as their counsel, and it wasn't farmed out to some law firm in Minneapolis or Mineola or Long Island, someplace like that. And Bill Evans was handling most of the foreclosures at that time. This, you know, mid-70s, and when First National Bank was foreclosing, and he used to prepare an order, and he'd go over to see Judge Cass, who would act as an acting Supreme Court justice at the time, and he'd sign an order appointing a referee of sale and an order concerning the publication of the sale of the property. And I think it was Sam or Charlie that said that, well, his father used to, Wilson Price used to foreclose mortgages. Only in those days, he would take the steamboat down at the boat landing to Mayville, spend the night at the Peacock Inn, which was in Mayville. You probably remember the Peacock Inn. Yeah. And, you know, the lawyers who were there to try cases would all be around, you know, having dinner and I think drinking and playing cards. And then in the morning, his father would go to court and get a referee of sale appointed, and come back on the steamboat. So it'd take him like 2 days to get a referee appointed in the foreclosure sale. Now, Bill used to, as I recall, Bill would call up Judge Cass, Willard Cass, and he would say, well, I need a referee in a foreclosure sale, and you want to give me a name of somebody? And so I think Judge Cass used to sometimes tell Bill, well, I'm going to name Dick Slater as a referee of sale in this particular case. And in that case, Bill would then walk up to the surrogate's office, which, when they were holding court down in Jamestown, right, get him to sign the order. And so it'd take, Bill all of, 30 minutes to get a referee appointed, whereas it used to take 2 days for Wilson Price to get a referee. But it was some of the things. I think something the Bar Association has missed, and it's probably maybe just it's like the sign of the times, is that if you recall, when we were young lawyers, a young lawyer was expected to come to the clam bake in the summertime, and not just come, but to work. And I remember you'd get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, scrubbing clams, and you'd have breakfast, and as the day went on, and it was all the lawyers would go to the bar. It would usually be at the Den Adelsman's Club, and everybody would be drinking beer and everything else all day long, and it was just really, talk about camaraderie. And I remember one time Ward Westerberg, who was my age and had been in charge of returning the liquor to the liquor store that had not been opened, that had been used for the bar picnic. And he said he'd gotten pulled over when he was driving back, and in his front seat he had a box of all this liquor. Now, he not only had the opened bottles there, he also had the unopened bottles to take back to the liquor store. And the state trooper said, well, where have you been? And Ward explained he'd been to the bar picnic. And the state trooper just said, well, be careful and go on your way. But, yeah, in this day and age, it'd probably be treated a little differently than that. But I think that we used to have a lot more fun, I think, in those.
Well, I even interviewed Tom in the fire pit.
I'm still trying to live that one down. I had these nice new Converse sneakers on, and I think that Mark Hampton was the chairman he was the chairman of the picnic that year, and he gave me the job of heating up this stainless steel cooler that they're going to cook roast corn in. And there were a lot of old Christmas trees. I'm not sure where they'd come from, but that were around the Den Adelsman grounds. And I gathered a lot of these Christmas trees, and I had this fire going. It's probably about as high as this building. And around this fire pit was like this metal, a metal, sort of solid metal fence, about 18 inches tall. And I got this thing so hot, and I was with my brand new shoes up against it, and I happened to look down and see my toes, and my shoes are flat across the front. And it was probably, I'd started drinking beer about noon probably that day, and this was around 4 o'clock, and it usually doesn't take too many beers for me to have more beer than I probably should be drinking. And anyways, so it sounds like you've heard of my episode of.
Well, I was there.
Oh, okay, you were there. You witnessed it.
I not even heard of it.
You saw it.
I really wish I had my camera. No, but we were all feeling good. You were just a little ahead of us. That's it.
But anyway,
But you're absolutely right. Those are good camaraderie building moments, and
they are.
and that group of people of our relatively same vintage, we did a lot together.
Yeah. Yep.
I can remember events, even at one thing I'd forgotten about till seconds ago. Bob Van Every, at his place outside of Faulkner, he would sort of have events. He and Judy, you do volleyball. It was a volleyball tournament. Now you wouldn't think about that now to save your soul, but that was just they did it.
And softball games. Remember go to Tony Span's place up on Lake Erie,
Yeah.
and I don't think things like that are happen anymore. And it's a
Give me your funniest incident. So it might have been a courtroom. It might have been something where you said, Greg, you're not going to believe this, but I was at a city council meeting, or I was this, and this. Something that you'd say, Greg, you're not going to believe this happened.
Well, I don't know if this was a funny thing, but when I was the Associate Corporation Counsel, Rick Sotier assigned me some of the real tasty jobs. Like, for example, in those days, the city of Jamestown owned Jamestown General Hospital. And so I would have to go to these Jamestown General Hospital meetings, and they were always dinner meetings, and Dr. Tony Barone was the chairman of the board, and it was amazing. I'd hear these people talk about, I remember they talked about, those folks over on Foote Avenue, and it sounded like the enemy or something. They were talking about the people at WCA Hospital, and the animosity between WCA Hospital and Jamestown General. Anyways, it was amazing. Thinking back, I can't think of. Sometimes I find it hard to believe that I actually practiced law for 43 years. It's just surprising. It's sort of like, how could this be, But, it was really a wonderful life, and I was, like I said, the Prices were such wonderful people to deal with, other than Bill Evans, who came, they'd never hired an associate before.
Yeah.
And so when I started, I was a strange thing. Nobody told me whether I was supposed to have a half an hour for lunch or whether I was supposed to have an hour, and they just were so nice, and they were just wonderful people to deal with, and I don't think that we ever had really a cross word, and that was true also with Trip Price. He was such a outgoing, sociable type guy, and Sam Jr., he and I, like I said, Sam Jr. came in '81, and so we practiced many years together, and I don't think we ever had an argument. We really, it was just a wonderful way to live, and I'm very, very happy that I came to Jamestown. It certainly is a different place than when I came back here, 1973. But it was a good life, and many wonderful people in the bar association that were, friends and acquaintances, and it's a wonderful thing to have you record some of these memories of some of the people who've been around for a longer period of time, to preserve some of those things which otherwise would just totally be lost.
This has been great, Tom.
Well,
I
hope I haven't given you more than what you're looking for, but.